Hello, everyone, and welcome back to WoundCasters by Wound Care Today, where we explore the gaps by exploring the truth. I'm your host, Felix Boecker, and today I'm excited to be here with another amazing guest. But before we begin, don't forget that you can reach out to us through our website at wct-us.com, where you can also find tons and tons of educational material, all related to the world of chronic wound care. My guest today is none other than Paul Kim, professor at the University of Texas Southwestern, and he just wrote a new book on the use of negative pressure therapy. So naturally, I'm very excited to have him on the show and talk about it. Paul, welcome to WoundCasters. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much, Dr. Boecker, for letting me be on the show. I have listened. I'm an avid listener, so thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. Well, that's good to hear. Always love to have a good audience. So listen, you just wrote a textbook on negative pressure therapy, and that's why we're here. So before we get into that, I think everybody wants to hear a little bit about your story, how you got to be in wound care and how you got to end up writing this book.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say this was a multi-person effort. So it's not my book. There's multiple great authors that contributed to this textbook. So I will give them credit as we continue to talk through this. But just to give you a little brief history for myself, I was raised in Colorado. I went to podiatry school in Ohio, then did a residency at Nova Fairfax Hospital. And then I taught at one of the podiatry schools in Arizona for almost 5 years. And then I went back to Georgetown University Hospitals, where I did my last rotation as a third-year resident. And there I learned a lot more about limb salvage or limb function preservation and wounds and chronically difficult wounds to heal from Chris Attinger. And that's where John Steinberg and I became very good friends as well. And then approximately in 2019, I was asked to come here to UT Southwestern. Prior to that, when I was at Georgetown, I did a lot of research, probably 0.5 FTE research. So I published quite a bit in this space. That's when I was first introduced to negative pressure wound therapy with installation, by the way. And I think that's what people have known me for, because I published a bunch of stuff regarding that kind of therapy. But I came to UT Southwestern here in Dallas, Texas, to take over their wound program as the medical director. So I've been more administrative for the last 9 years than I have ever been. I still do clinical practice as well. And going back to our topic here today on negative pressure wound therapy, it's a therapy that's used ubiquitously, and that's just not here in the United States, but across the world. And there's lots of new technologies and a lot of companies in this space. And people have kind of used to using it by kind of learning hands-on, and there's a lot of arts and craftiness about negative pressure wound therapy. And I think when I looked into the literature, there's a lot as far as PubMed literature is concerned. There are bits and pieces here and there on very focused topics. And there have been other published textbooks on this topic, but they're mostly user guides and technique guides. There's never been a comprehensive textbook on negative pressure wound therapy. That includes from nuts to bolts. That includes for nursing, for APPs, for physical therapists, for surgeons, for non-surgeons. The whole thing has never been published collectively. There's been some good supplements published in the past on various topics of negative pressure wound therapy, like I said, but nothing in a textbook format. So when I was looking to think about what topic is important to learn about, this is one of those fundamental things that I think that everybody in wound care should know a little bit about. I started reaching out to my colleagues and said, do you have a good book you can recommend on this topic? And really, the answer was no from everybody. And so I said, well, there's an opportunity. So I reached out to a contact that I have at Springer Nature, who's the publishers of this textbook. And they immediately said, yes, we want to publish this. This looks like it needs to fill a void in the space right now. And so I said, okay, so let me call up some of my friends to be authors, and just to talk a little bit about the book. Chris Attinger wrote the preface of the book, which is he's just a giant in the limb salvage world, plastic surgeon. And then Dennis Orgill, who was there from the very beginning at the onset of the development at Wake Forest University with Morquaz and Argenta and Joseph Molnar, who also wrote a chapter for this textbook. But he wrote the mechanism of action, which is, I think, a very pivotal and important and is very basic to every kinds of negative pressure that we use now. It starts with the foundation, and that foundation is based on the mechanism of action of how this thing works. And then Rob Kirshner at the University of Miami, who everybody knows, a wonderful guy, dermatologist, wrote the chapter on portable devices, which is becoming much more popular.
Yes.
Staying in the hospital is not a good thing. We all know that. We want to get people discharged as fast as we possibly can. So these portable devices are better. They're less bulky. They have longer battery life. And I think it's just from the patient perspective, a better way to go. Dennis Orgill also wrote the chapter on plastic surgery, the applications of negative pressure wound therapy on plastic surgery. And then Alicia Rapallo, who's an amazing vascular surgeon, wrote the chapter on vascular surgery applications. Luis Fernandez, who's out of UT Tyler, just down the road from us, that is a wonderful traumatologist, a general surgeon, acute care surgeon, wrote the section on general trauma, application of negative pressure wound therapy on general trauma. Brett Christ, who's an orthopedic surgeon, traumatologist, wrote the section on orthopedic surgery. And then on burns, Thomas, who is an amazing abdominal surgeon, wrote that chapter. And then John Steinberg, who is a good friend of mine, was my former partner, wrote the chapter on diabetic lower extremity. And then Liz Faust, who everybody knows and loves, did a techniques chapter on standard negative pressure. And then Marianne Opes, who's the queen of installation therapy, wrote the technique and ostomies, wrote the techniques chapter. Alan Gabriel is another plastic surgeon, wrote the chapter on economics of the use of this device, because I think that's very important considering our health resource constraints that we all live under. And then final chapter 14, is Joseph Molnar on the future of negative pressure. And I'll tell you, Dr. Boecker, when we started writing, this was 18 months ago, and it will be coming out on Amazon on March 30th. So look for that, or you can go to the Springer Nature website. You can buy it there as well. But it has changed a lot. Even within the 18 months, there's been some new technologies that have come out. So I already foresee a next edition, because it's going to be antiquated. And it's like textbooks in some respects are already antiquated, right? Like, who picks up a textbook? I'm an old school guy. I've got textbooks all over my office, and that's just the kind of, I like the tactile experience. Yeah, exactly. I like the tactile experience and the smell of the paper and everything, but we understand the new generation doesn't learn that way. So, they also come out with a PDF version that's an electronic version, which is, again, I don't even know the cost of these things, but that I think is going to be probably the more desirable one for most people, because it's electronic format. They can pull it out anywhere. But yes, I just like the old format of a textbook. And so we're very excited. It took a long time, and all those individuals contributed. They spent many, many hours drafting their chapters, and there's great clinical pictures, by the way, and technique pictures and figures and legends. And so it's comprehensive. It's a lot. I mean, it's like close to 300, 400 pages. So it's not light reading, but it is, there's a lot of information in there. And our hope, all of us collectively, is to elevate the use of negative pressure appropriately. Because I think sometimes you can have complications with negative pressure, and it may be technique driven, it may be inappropriate indications. There's lots of reasons for it, but we want to kind of set a benchmark standard and say, this is what experts in their respective fields, how they apply it, and what patients they apply it on. And hopefully from their mistakes, people can learn. I certainly did by reading through all these chapters.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, you've got really a who's who in the wound care world writing chapters for you there. So that's absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to get my hand on a copy and start reading it myself. But, one thing that you mentioned was that there really hasn't been a textbook. And I was thinking back to my own surgical training, and I remember the very first time I was told, here, apply this wound vac. I was actually looking for some guidance, and I couldn't find any.
Right.
And it was really just trying to find a senior resident who was willing to show me the ropes. So it was a, very, definitely showing my age here with the see one, do one, teach one mantra that we used to have
It
in
still
the surgical
happens.
training world, right?
It still happens.
So why do you think, with as long as negative pressure therapy has been around, that it's
Yeah.
taking this long to write a comprehensive textbook on the subject?
Great question. Maybe I was just dumb and decided to do it, but it was, it's been 30 years. The technology is 30 years old.
Right.
And like you, my experience as a resident was very similar. It's just like, this is how you do it. You're shown a couple times, then you apply it, and you may be applying it wrong. I think another thing is that it's very, even though it's very robust therapy and it's well adopted, it's been kind of relegated to more of a procedure that's not necessarily a technique that's not necessarily, a surgeon can't be bothered by it, or whatever. And then it's often relegated to nurses who have become experts in this field.
Yes.
And I think part of the reason why it hasn't gotten kind of the legs in publication as far as a textbook is concerned, because nurses in general don't write textbooks, at least broad textbooks. They write nursing textbooks and some other things, and certainly exceptions to this rule. But I think for us, for others that are in academics, writing and reading is just part of what we do. And so it was more of a natural thing. And I honestly don't know. I wish there's somebody who would have written something before we did, because it would have been nice to have just pull off your shelf. Hey, I want to look this thing up real quick. Or, if you have a electronic version, go to the chapter or section that you want to look at over and over again. It's become so much easier now that, you can just look up whatever you want to the exact word that you're looking for in all of these electronic formats. But I think that's part of the reason. And I think that people just assume that it's an established therapy, that we should all be using it and for everything, which is not the correct assumption. I think there are better indications than others. And then in some hands, it works better than others, just like anything else we do. And so, again, trying to create that kind of benchmark, the baseline of knowledge that people should get. The other piece of this, Dr. Boecker, is that training and education has predominantly been driven by industry on these devices. And this is not an industry sponsored in any way, this manuscript or this textbook. So it doesn't favor or is not biased towards one company's product or another. It's very generic. Now, some companies have certain derivatives, adjuncts that are different, makes them unique. But we talk about things in very broad terms and say, for example, the mechanism of action is not just on a single company's device. It's across the board because it's all negative pressure. Now, you can argue with me and say this is not negative pressure, this is positive pressure, which I've heard some people say. But, it is what it is. And, whatever name you want to put to this therapy, we know it works, and it works well when appropriately applied on the right patient. It's not a universal, just a trash dump. And I see this as well. People are like, oh, I don't know what to do. Let's just vac it, quote unquote, vac it, which is, again, is not, I don't think is the appropriate approach. I think there needs to be some thought behind it. And then there's sometimes these wounds are very difficult to apply negative pressure wound therapy to. And it takes hours, literally hours, for some nurses who are relegated to apply it, to put it on appropriately without leaks and alarms and all that stuff. And so I think the technique chapters by Liz Faust and Marianne, who I think will be very helpful for those that are just looking for technique, tips and tricks. Although I will tell you, it's seeded throughout the textbook. Each author has their own little, hey, don't do this, do this. This is easier, this is a harder way to do it, and so on and so forth. So you're going to get little bits of experience throughout. But if you want to just hardcore technique stuff, I think those two chapters, 11 and 12 would be the best.
Yeah. So, one of the things that you just made me think about is what I see a lot from non-wound care providers is either they go wet to dry, and if that fails, they go straight to a wound vac. Yeah. And I think it's just for a lack of knowledge for all the other dressings that are out there, all the other techniques that we have available to us in the world of chronic wound care. So my question with that is, who is your intended audience for this? Is it the wound care practitioners who already know about negative pressure or should know about negative pressure, but are just wanting to expand their knowledge on the subject? Or is it more geared towards the non-wound care providers who don't know as much, or at least we think don't know as much about negative pressure therapy as us wound care providers?
Probably both. There was no specific thing in mind as we put these chapters together. I think, if you want just the introduction to what negative pressure is as a platform, I wrote that first chapter specifically. It's very basic to probably you and many others going, we know that there's a tube and there's a pump and there's this foam or interface dressing. Probably most people know that stuff. But if you want to build that basic knowledge, I think you start there. I worry a bit about people using this that are not familiar with this, because I think there are some things that you can do to make it makes the wounds worse, make the patient's condition worse. And so I think that you have to, just like any medical therapy, although this is considered a dressing, it's somewhat invasive because you have, it's applied in open areas. So I don't think it's innocuous by just doing it and saying it's okay. I've seen some disasters that way. And so it's the target's both, but honestly, it was just for me, I get a lot of questions about certain aspects of negative pressure, and I wanted a consolidated way I can say, hey, just read this. It's in chapter 9 on open abdomens by Dr. Thomas. He talks all about this. I think that just directing somebody to somewhere that they can read and research a little bit better on their own. The other piece about it is a lot of the medical students and new residents are delegated to this activity many times, and they have no knowledge of this stuff. I mean, why should they? And they're just, like you said earlier, it's just like passed down from one generation to another without fully understanding or comprehending what they're actually doing and what this device actually does. Because the other aspect of this, which Alan Gabriel talks about, is the cost. These are not inexpensive devices. The rental costs on the outpatient, the inpatient costs of the disposables, the pump rentals, the warranties, all that stuff, it better be worth it. And it better be safe and effective, I guess is my point. And so you need to think about the financial aspect when it's inappropriately applied or applied in the wrong patient type. Then it's not just a risk to the hazard to the patient, but it's also a healthcare cost to the health system, which ultimately all of us pay for. And so I think that it's important to do things right if you're going to do it at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. Is there anything, as you were writing and editing and revising this book, is there anything that you yourself learned that you didn't know before as you were writing it, that you were like, oh wow,
absolutely.
I never knew this about negative pressure therapy?
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many things I couldn't even name them all. There are so many things in each chapter. I'm like, I've never thought of it that way, or I didn't know about that. That's the point. I mean, it's not because whenever I read a textbook and there's senior editors involved, yes, we do proofreading and all that stuff, and make sure that it's all in the same language and style and all that. But also, I think for me, it's a very valuable time to learn more about this topic. I've been labeled as an expert in this space, and I don't know why, but maybe because I have a few publications. But until I read through all of this, I feel like I've got a much better grasp of what I'm talking about. There's so many little pearls to each chapter. And specifically for me, there are areas that I don't use negative pressure because it's out of scope of my practice. For example, in the open abdomen, that's a fascinating application of negative pressure in general. I think that's very interesting. Burns, I don't do burns, but Mark Matthews, who wrote the chapter on burns, does. And so, he and some of this stuff can transfer over to whatever area that you're interested in. And you can steal some ideas or thoughts, and it makes you think a little bit. And so I think it was very valuable for me. And speaking with Dennis Orgill too, who's the co-editor of this, I mean, he's like, this is really good. I'm like, yeah, this is a good book. So coming from him, he's the guy, he's the man. And so I was just like, okay, good. So this is going to be a good product for people.
Yeah. So you said from beginning to end, it took about 18 months to write this book and get it out to the publisher. And out onto the shelves, which to me seems like a very short period of time to write a comprehensive textbook. So what was to you the most surprising aspect of that whole process?
Well, so if you were Dr. Becker, if you wrote a textbook on negative pressure, that's a multi-year process if you were the only author. I could have written the textbook on negative pressure wound therapy from nuts to bolts, but that would have taken me years, perhaps decades to write. And so having these specific authors allows them, and you have to make sure that they're on task as far as deadlines, but it gives you a lot of it gives you a little bit of leniency as far as it gives you some breathing room, because each person is only tasked to write one chapter, and so it's a little easier that way. And by the way, the original deadline was 1 year, and I was like, there's no way. So 1 year expired, and I went to the editors. I'm like, we're not even close. And I've been, bothering these guys and gals and saying, hey, get your chapter in, But everybody's busy. Everybody's working. They've got lives, so you can't expect them to drop everything. But then you set some hard deadlines for them and say, if I don't have your chapter by X date, because it's been over a year, then I will find another author to replace you. You have to play hardball a little bit, and that'll get people motivated. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll get it done. No problem. And they do. And then there's a lot of back and forth from then on. So I think it's, and I hate to say it like this way, Dr. Becker, I don't know who else you've talked to who've been editors of textbooks, but it's a lot easier now than it has been, because a lot of it is automated and a lot of it is electronic now. And from the publisher's perspective, whether it's Springer Nature or somebody else, it's all the same. Their upfront cost is very minimal, if you think about it, because a lot of these are not printed, and the printing costs are what's expensive. When it's electronic, it's electronic. When the authors submit their chapter, it's all electronic form. It's not hard. I mean, like, okay, we've got 1 gigabyte for this textbook, and then we can just sell that gigabyte as many times as we want without having to print these books. Now they are printing it as well, but they in the past that was their only option. Now the costs are so much less from the editors or the publisher's perspective. It's not that hard. And by the way, I'm writing another textbook, and this will be on another big topic that has a lot of controversy, perhaps, and it's really needed, are on biologics or skin subs in general.
Yeah.
And beyond the reimbursement stuff, I don't get into any of that. I talk about what is it, how does it work, what are our different options, and much like this, I kind of broke it out, brought in the recognized experts in each of those, whether it's allografts or xenografts or different types of xenografts, the synthetics or whatever. I went through this approach the same way, because and I hate to plug this now because it's not even started yet, but it's 2006 was the last textbook on skin subs. Can you believe that? And
Wow.
The person that wrote it was Dennis Orgill in 2006. And so I'm like, okay, it's time. It's time to there's a lot of discussion, a lot of publications on, whether it's the amniotics or whatever. But those aren't real. They're not, in my estimation, they're very biased in general. And they're often industry driven for those publications. And I've been a part of those, by the way. I'm not saying I'm immune to that, like white papers and all that stuff. And so this is another textbook that's not sponsored by anybody, because I wanted to get a real world look at not only what the data says about each of these types of skin subs, but also the individual experience by the authors who are purported to be the experts in that area. And I think that's valuable. And that's the same approach I took with negative pressure. I told clearly to the authors, said, I don't want this product specific. I don't want you to name any company or name any specific product, because that's not the point. It's the technology that I'm interested in. And that's what the author or the editors were interested in. Now, what Springer Nature does with this, as far as getting support by industry, I don't know. That's really up to them, but that was not my intent.
Yeah. That was actually one of the questions that I had for you after listening to your story about the process of writing this book. Was it fun enough for you to do it again? And I guess you already answered that question.
Well, I don't know about fun. There are times where it becomes, and I've got to say, the hardest chapter for me was my own. because I bounced it off of Dr. Orgel, Professor Orgel, and I said, I need you to read my chapter because I'm not going to have my perspective is going to be so skewed because I wrote it. And the other thing is that mine was the last chapter that was submitted. He's like, oh, there's like, where are you guys done? I'm like, yeah, there's just one more chapter. And I'm like, who's that? I'm like, oh, that's me. Let me finish my chapter, and I will. I did that somewhat intentionally because I wanted to read what other people were saying and then kind of build a little bit off of that, maybe fill in some gaps. But the other
Yeah.
piece of it is I just got lazy and I kind of forgot about it. I'm like, oh, shoot, I got to get on this.
Yeah. No, that certainly makes sense. One of the questions that I have for you, and I don't know if you can answer that at all, but you're the only author that I have access to right now in this
Mhm.
conversation. So I kind of want to just pick your brain. AI has come up before on this podcast, and I see a lot of AI going into writing books these days, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you can go into your favorite AI platform and have it spin out a chapter for you in just a few minutes. So, where do you see the book industry going with that in the future? Because I do think there's still a need for human content, human developed
Absolutely.
content, right? The human editing part of that, because we're
Mhm.
writing for humans. We're not writing for a
Right.
computer. We're writing for other humans. And I think other humans want to see human generated content.
Uh,
But did that come about at all in your discussions
yeah.
with Springer Natural and or Springer Nature? And where do you see the future of that going?
That's a really great question, Dr. Becker, because can I just anecdotally say a couple things? One is I just newly discovered YouTube. I know it's been around for a long time, but it's amazing. I mean, what you can watch. But it's
Yeah,
interesting if you look at certain topics, it's AI generated. And the
yeah,
ones that are not, it will say this is not AI generated, which I think is an interesting disclaimer. And is there
yeah,
a difference? Oh, absolutely. The when someone's voicing over versus AI voiceover, so different. You can tell right away. Even though they
right,
try to disguise it, it's the way that they finish their sentences, the emphasis when they, especially numbers, the AI gets tripped up when it's like 99.9 or whatever. They get tripped up. They don't know exactly how to say that. But from the publisher's perspective, it's kind of been a very big learning curve for me because I've published other chapters in textbooks, but I've never been a senior author on one or a senior editor on one. And what I noticed is, they'll do their own editing. So they'll go through all the chapters, and I assumed it was somebody reading the chapters. But some of the comments that I got back were clearly AI generated because it made no sense. It was so nonsensical. The query, like this should read this way instead of this way, and then I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense in the context of what we're talking about, and it's completely nonsensical. It was literally nonsensical. I'm like, no, no, no. That's not right. We're not going to do that query or remove that query. We're not going to rewrite that sentence this way. So that's very common. Now, will it have a role? Yes, I do think so. I think for data gathering, I think it can extract a lot of information very quickly. And so when you're doing, for example, if you're doing some referencing where you're looking for citations, I think it can pull that out. Now, it's up to you to read those and figure out what's appropriate and what's real and what's perhaps biased or the study design's terrible. I think a human being still needs to do that part. But I think there is some value to it, and I think maybe AI is still obviously evolving, and as it gets better, perhaps you won't even be able to see the distinction, and the editing process will be that much easier for everybody, and the cost that will drive the cost down hopefully. And these textbooks, I remember when I went to college. I don't know if you remember this, but like you went to get your textbooks every spring or fall, or
yeah,
and then you go to the textbook store, which was on campus typically, and I went to
yes,
the University of Colorado, so it's a huge university. And then the textbooks were used or new. You thought the new ones were better, but it turns out it doesn't make a difference. But they were like $400 or $500 a piece. Do you remember that?
yes,
And that
yeah,
was
oh
back then.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
Crazy. And everybody would walk out with a stack of textbooks that, over $1,000 in textbooks. And
yeah.
I think the change in the industry in textbooks as far as e-publishing and all this stuff, I think the costs have been driven down, and I think AI could be a part of that in the future.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me to hear you say this. That you had an AI editor right? When the whole idea is behind, and I'm sure there's some disclaimers that you signed said this is not AI generated content, this is human generated content, and yet the editor, the publishing company, goes around and runs it through AI to look for spelling
Yeah.
mistakes and grammatical errors
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's really a fascinating piece of the story. So, is there anything about the book that we haven't talked about yet that you want the world to know about?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground today. I think that it's definitely going to be in my library, and kind of the word has gone out. This is coming out, and there's a lot of people that are interested. I just think it fills a niche that seemingly should have been filled already. So it's something. It's nothing novel. It's not something revolutionary. It doesn't change paradigms, but what it does is it provides a foundation of knowledge and skills for people that are actively using this device or want to use this device. I think it can fill a hole, especially in trainees. I think early on, I think it'd be helpful if they knew how to do it right the first time versus later, without having made a lot of mistakes like we all have. And the other thing, I guess, to end on is that there will be, I am sure there'll be a second edition because the technology is changing so much. Things are becoming more portable. There's some new negative pressure devices that enclose the wound and the peri-wound, which is an astonishing concept if you think about that. And different materials are being used. The length of therapy, total length of therapy, is being shortened. The duration between dressing changes have been lengthened. I mean, there's a lot, but this is all based on new technology and new materials that are being developed by industry, and because they're trying to distinguish themselves from each other. So I think that's good. I love the competition.
No, I agree. The other thought I just had was my knowledge of negative pressure therapy and all the wound vacs and all that stuff really just came from me actually doing it and learning from my own mistakes over the years. So I guess my question is, how can we shorten that time frame to learning a little bit? Maybe you have some insight on what you find is the most common mistake that people make when it comes to negative pressure therapy that we can all do better when it comes to helping our patients heal.
Well, that's a great question, very broad and specific at the same time. I wish there was a simple, byline of this is what you need to do, make everything work perfectly. I think what's actually going to happen is the technology, because the difficulty in application or the perception of difficulty in application and perhaps inappropriate application has driven industry to design things that are simpler, that like a one piece, like a Band-Aid kind of approach. And I think that will change the paradigm of being an expert on negative pressure, where you can open the floodgates to say anybody can apply it. You don't have to be an expert, which is good if a therapy has been shown to be effective, like negative pressure wound therapy has. So these tips and tricks and the arts and crafty stuff, I think is going to go away. I think there's going to be a standardization, simple application, one touch button operation, just really, and you reduce the number of retained foreign bodies and leaks and macerations and all this other stuff that's commonly, because those are all technique based. If you do it right, you're not going to have those problems. But so it's too hard to train everybody. So I think if you standardize a device or an application that is simple and with materials that are durable, and then perhaps providing some feedback to the patient and the clinician to more appropriately change the dressings or remove it all in its entirety. I think all of those things are going to be our future.
Yeah. So just before we close this out, where can people get their hands on this book? I think you mentioned Amazon and directly from Springer. Yep. Do you know if it'll be anywhere else?
I do not know, but I know that those two sites for sure, because I checked on Amazon and it's listed on it's being available at March 30th. I don't know about the Springer website when that's going to be, and I don't know if it's just electronic or it's both electronic and printed versions. Okay. I'm assuming it's going to be both on the Springer. I'm just not sure about Amazon. And no, I have not done an Audible reading through all of the chapters.
Well, I'm sure an Audible textbook, while that is a growing audience as well.
Mhm.
With you mentioned some of the pictures and figures, and I'm sure tables and diagrams and illustrations that are in the book. That may be difficult to
Yeah.
do. I don't. Is that something you're planning on doing? To do an Audible textbook at some point? Is that in the
No,
works, or you're not sure?
I think for the visual, because this is a very visual space that we live in. Just doing it even visually, it's hard because there's the smell, the touch. There's so many other senses used in the wound care space. It's already challenged by just a two-dimensional picture or figure. It's very
Right.
hard. But I think that some people, but the culture that we live in is that I listen to podcasts and I listen to all kinds of things on the radio or not radio, but XM or Sirius, or I download content. So people are doing it already. To be honest with you, maybe you can answer this question. Have you ever seen a textbook in that kind of format?
I have not. I have not, and I think the way we're going right now with podcasts, for example, I feel like that's more likely where we're going, or with visual content on YouTube. But an
Mhm.
actual textbook, I have not seen in an audiobook format.
But I also find that though on YouTube, my newly discovered gem is that that there is these podcasts that are audio only. They're also visual as well. I mean, you can watch them talk to each other or whatever the topic is, and you can find it on some of these channels that are streamed. So I think that's interesting because originally podcasts were podcasts; they're just
Right.
audio. And I thought that was great. But now I see people kind of turning and saying, oh, we like that in certain circumstances, but we also want to see them interact. And so it depends on what you want, which one do you prefer, which way you want to prefer it.
Yeah. We're not on YouTube yet, but we're talking about it for 2026 to hopefully get us onto that platform. Right now, we're mostly audio format, but we've talked about it because YouTube is growing, and we don't
Yeah,
want to leave anybody behind. Well,
that's right.
listen, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, which we sadly have to bring to an end for today. Thank you all for spending some time with us today, exploring this gap and exploring this truth. We want to hear your thoughts, comments, and reaction to this conversation. So please reach out and buy Paul Kim's book. If there are any particular topics you want to hear about or guests you would like to see on the show, reach out and contact us. And if you're listening to this on a podcast app, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so others can find this content more easily. And if you like this particular episode, please share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to check out our website at wct-us.com for lots more educational content. And finally, be sure to tune in next time as we explore yet another aspect of the challenging and rewarding field of chronic wound care. Ciao.